afternoon and welcome to Tetewatha Partyline Talkshow. I'm your host, Lou-Ann Stacey, and today is MCK Friday. And so today I am joined by the Grand Chief, Joe Norton. Welcome to the show, Joe. You're a busy man, been out of town most of the week. I keep up on where you're heading, so maybe we can talk a little bit about some of the meetings that you and some of the other chiefs have attended this week.
Well, there was a division of responsibilities, let me put it that way, with 2 days of meetings in the Iroquois Caucus in Akwesasne at the Akwesasne Casino. Myself, Kasnahawa Sky Deer, and Gina Deer attended the caucus session. I was there for 1 day only and had to leave and go across to Ottawa for a number of discussions there regarding, the relationship between Canada and Kahnawake, and a number of different aspects related to that. Let's go back to the portion of the meeting that I attended at Akwesasne, the Iroquois Caucus. It was a general discussion in terms of, and I think one of the biggest items was the actual operation or the function of the caucus itself, and there was kind of a consensus going around the room that there was dissatisfaction in how we were operating, or we weren't being very efficient. There was some things that were allowed to slide by, and we should be more attentive of. And one of the things we looked at was the terms and conditions of the actual reason why there was such a thing as a caucus, the financing of it and things of that nature. And then there's one of the situations in which we actually had a surplus of funds, because we didn't spend our money. In other words, every community gives $10,000 a year towards a general fund for our operations and things of that nature, for the payment of a coordinator and a number of other aspects to it. And there was a surplus, $115,000, which is large in terms of when you have an organization and money is being spent, and it should be spent. So I said, I spoke my mind as usual. I said, this is a sign either that we're not doing enough, because we're not spending. It doesn't mean spending, crazy. So you got a fairly large surplus. That means then, are we good? Do we have good administration? And try to penny pinch on everything, or should it be that we're just not spending our money? We're not a charity or anything like that, but certainly money is put in there, and for that reason should be spent on political activities and all the things that are happening. So that was sort of a comment that I had on that. And then, of course, there's going to be a replacement of the coordinator. So a committee was struck in order to look at that. Then started looking at the terms and conditions of the organizations. How do we come to conclusions or make decisions? There was discussions that went back and forth. We meet every 2 months, and somebody said, we have to, if a suggestion is made about doing a certain thing, that we should, if we can't do it on the first round, then there should be a second round of, coming back together again and saying, okay, raise this issue again. Then a third time, Well, that takes 6 months then if you're meeting only every 2 months.
Oh, yeah.
So we've got to be more efficient. We've got to find a way of coming to decisions and making sure that we, and there should be a threshold on how much money we can spend, how much money we can decide upon at a meeting, like this past week. There was figures that were thrown around like $5,000. Should be, a threshold saying we can spend $5,000, we can make a decision on that, rather than have to go back to our communities, meet with our councils, and go over, So we needed to do that kind of house cleaning, although sometimes it's painful to go through that, because there's a lot of back and forth about the decisions, the manner in which these decisions will be made. then there was a number of other things that were thrown into the mix in terms of how to come to a consensus. Even the word consensus, is it what does it mean to some? To some it means 100%. To others it means not necessarily 100%, because if you want 100%, if only one chief says no, and that means all of the councils, not just the grand chiefs that are represented. It means all of the council has to say yes. So you may never have a consensus, nothing moves, so we have to be a bit more practical about that. And that's been bothering people over the course of time, and then we went into, a number of other aspects in terms of, such as we're supposed to meet 6 times a year. And we had already agreed at one point in time that we were going to meet in Ottawa, because it's centrally located. That's the seat of government there. You got accessibility to members of parliament, and things like that. And it only makes sense to be meeting there when parliament is sitting. They're not
Right.
always sitting, so it winds up that 4 times a year that we'll meet in Ottawa. The other two times, the official meetings will be somewhere, within the communities, and there'll be special meetings that will be called too, and that we should, like the membership or citizenship summit that was organized by Kahnawake but was held in Akwesasne. That was a special meeting that was called. It wasn't a regular IC meeting, so there's those sorts of things. What's planned in the future is a language summit, a summit on taxation. Those will be not a part of the regular meeting, so they'll be held somewhere in the, we'll say in the Confederacy.
In the Confederacy, yeah. So I guess, let me ask a question. Do you feel that this group called the Iroquois Caucus helps us in terms of Kahnawake and some of our political issues? Is that supposed to be the role of it, or is it to make it come together that, all of the people who are of the Iroquois Nation have some of the common issues?
We are supposed to take on national issues of national importance, but what's been happening over the course of time, that the community issues specific are brought there.
Okay.
I'm looking at the agenda here. There's one issue that was on here, Six Nations farmers. Now, that's Six Nations issue, They should be taking care of that at home. It shouldn't be on the agenda.
So
it's not a criticism, but, it's a fact.
But I'm thinking things like taxation, border crossing. I mean, to me, those are big. Those are biggies. Those are big issues.
Add-ons on the agenda.
Yeah.
We said we'll eliminate, a number of different things, and we'll add border crossing, coordinated positions, the parliamentary work that needs to take place. We need to have somebody. We need to employ somebody to go and be a lobbyist in a sense, and begin to look at, in Ottawa, the different MPs, the different ministries for the work that we need to do to set things up so that when we're in Ottawa, we'll have people that will be coming to our meetings from the government of Canada, ministers, and perhaps at some point even the Prime Minister of Canada, because there was a number of statements that were made by some of the key leadership that was present, that the Iroquois Caucus has the ear of government and other organizations. They hear about us and they say, "Oh my God, this is who we represent." It's not like the Assembly of First Nations. We're an organization that has come together for common concerns, all related to our communities, our politics, and all of that. So, and we need to stick to that, and and make sure that we're well coordinated on this. We don't have millions of dollars, but we do have certain amount of funds that can be very important to the development of future political positions.
Okay. You're listening to K103.7, Tetewatha Show. Today is MCK Friday, and I'm joined by Grand Chief Joe Norton. Welcome back to Tetewatha Partyline Talkshow. I'm your host, Len Stacey, and today is MCK Friday, and I'm speaking with the Grand Chief, Joe Norton, and we were talking about Iroquois Caucus. He attended the meetings this week, and maybe just a little bit on the Kahnawake-Canada relations, because you left one meeting to go to another.
Before we do that.
Oh, sorry,
though,
you had one more thing you want to add?
There was items on the agenda that I didn't participate in because it was only held on the second day, yesterday, and I wasn't there. There was a discussion that arose concerning nation-to-nation issues, and in particular hunting, and we had discussions in the past with the Grand Council of the Cree up in James Bay. A lot of their people come down to hunt down in this area for geese. For some strange reason, the geese are not going up north. They're stopping. Majority of them are stopping here. Here meaning from in the St. Lawrence Valley, and a lot of them go to Akwesasne. They go to Tyendinaga, and they're reaching out and asking for permission to come and hunt in our territories. They come to Kahnawake too, and so there's that permission that has been discussed, and there's been independently each community has given out letters to the Crees to come and hunt in our areas. We're looking for something reciprocal. We were talking about having our people go and hunt moose in their territories. So, it's part of an exchange in which. Again, it's just it's nation to nation, and it means that when they come here, they're under our protection, and that no game wardens or anything can prevent them from coming in, and shooting what they have to, or hunting for what they need to, and vice versa too. Up in the James Bay area, there's issues up there about the Quebec, what do they call them, MNR, Minister of Natural Resources, and their interference with that. So the Crees. We're not there yet, but we're going to be soon, at some point in time. And the same thing applies with the Mi'kmaq community of Listigouche, in which a lot of our people go there and hunt at this time of the year, and we have to have some kind of reciprocal arrangement too. In any event, that was an issue, and I have to do the follow-up on that. I don't want to make it sound like it's a burden, but it's something that has to happen. Then there was one other item, and cannabis, the Seven Leaf, there's a company called Seven Leaf in Akwesasne, and they had extended an invitation to all the caucus members to go on Thursday evening, pick up by bus and taken to Cornwall Island to look at an operation that they have there. I wasn't able to make it because I had to leave at 4 o'clock to go cross-country to Ottawa.
I know, that was a far trek.
Go from Mohawk to Algonquin territory, But at some point, Gus and Gina and Gus went, and so we'll get a report on that. Yeah.
Okay. So in your travels to Ottawa, how did that? What were some of the issues that you had there? I know looking at renegotiating your position in terms of Canada-Kahnawake relations.
Well, a little backgrounder to that. There has been since I would say this past winter. There have been problems in terms of a starting position for us in these meetings, leading to nation to nation government and things of that nature, Canada and Kahnawake, in which we had put forth a position that we were looking at the Turo Wampum as being our main relationship with Canada. Getting them to understand that that's where we're going to start. They're going to start with the Constitution of Canada, all their laws and everything. This is what prevents them from doing whatever. So on our part, we talked about using the Turo as our main focus. That shows the nation-to-nation relationship, and so on and so forth. On the side of Canada, the negotiations, the system that they have in place, the person that was responsible for all of that, a gentleman named Joe Wild, basically told our team a few months back that was sort of a non-starter. They couldn't deal with that. That they'll deal with our position in another fashion, and they tried to lay out the Canada's position on the relationship. So we stopped all negotiations. We asked them to leave. I wasn't in the meeting where this happened, but Clinton Phillips, who can do a good review of that, presented that, at that point, he says, we have to stop. He says, and because we cannot go any further with these discussions. And he actually asked them to leave, and they left. Came back, made a report. So since that time, they've been trying to get us back to the table. And for various reasons, things have just not worked out. There was the elections, there was the portfolios, and the people who were there before with the Canada-Kahnawake relations situation, or KCR, Kahnawake-Canada relations, have changed somewhat. There's no people that want to sit there, So the expansion of the teams have grown substantially. So we said, okay, we're going to have a meeting, we're going to go back to the table. And this was elevated to deputy minister level, which is, sort of a position where a deputy minister can highly recommend to the minister that we follow this course, and then the minister in turn goes to cabinet, and cabinet is the final decision making in establishing the relationship. But one of the element it was very clear in our discussion with the deputy minister that nothing Canada had at this point in time was satisfactory to us. The processes, in other words, that they were offering and suggesting, did not meet the standards that we had set for discussions. And they agreed. She agreed, and she says, yes, I understand that. But you do understand we have constraints too because of, the Constitution, the law. So it may be that we may not be able to come eye to eye at this point. But they did not have a problem with the two-row concept. They said we could start our discussions in the spirit and the recognition of that. And we could lay out a whole process on our side, what the two-row means to us. And they'll come back and they'll talk to us about, we basically know what their situation is, but they really don't understand or know what our procedure would be. But they're willing to listen. They're willing to move ahead.
Oh, okay.
So that breaks away from any kind of discussions that are going on across the country. And interestingly enough, she said there are other tribal organizations and communities that are looking at what we're doing very closely in terms of saying, this is something that not necessarily using the two-row, but using similar types of concepts. Because the position that's there now on Canada's part, that, there's the Constitution, and you go back in time, there's Confederation, 1867, then there's pre-Confederation, 1763, the Royal Proclamation. Then after that, there's nothing. So the history, in a sense, starts then. What we're talking about is we go back way before then. In the eastern part of Canada, in the Maritimes, here in Quebec, there are, and the only area where there's, if you want to call it treaties or in modern day treaties, is with the Decrees of James Bay, which is mid 70s, which began the actual the treaty process here, and it was a first. But then you go in the Maritimes, you go elsewhere. There are treaties, but they date back way prior to even pre-colonial times. When it was the French or the British or somebody else that was here. It wasn't Canada, But they really didn't want to, or they're very concerned about dealing with that. Then as you get into Ontario, then you start going out west. The number treaty process begins, and now they're calling that modern day treaties. They're only like 150 years old, maybe 200 years old, and it moves on. Then you hit the west coast, and again, it stops there, and there are no. It's just for portions of British Columbia, if I recall correctly. There are massive pieces of massive areas in British Columbia, and there are no modern day treaties. Nothing that's recent, going back, and everything goes way back in time. So that creates a dilemma for them because their mindset is it's got to be within a certain time. It's got to match or it's got to fit within the constitutional framework, which doesn't allow for what we're talking about. So we have to break that mold, and we start that process, and that's what this is all about, you know.
Okay.
So we're developing a memorandum of understanding that includes the two role and the working relationship between Canada and that particular process that was established, 500 years ago, really. And so that was an issue that we're not totally by that. We have to sit down now, and people have to draft or redraft, because there's already something that's there.
Yeah.
Redraft something that is going to make sense to both parties and start what I consider to be perhaps a painful, gradual process, over time.
But hopefully it'll move forward.
It will move forward.
Yeah.
Something will result, but rest assured, we're not being drawn into a process that Canada has right now, and that applies to the whole the land claim process, as they call it, because within their process, there's specific land claims and there's comprehensive, and there's ceilings and sort of parameters to that one has to follow. Well, we've told them very clearly that we don't fit into that, because the scenery of Sault Ste. Louis is such a different claim, and it goes so far back in time, and it deals with matters beyond when Canada was Canada. Canada inherited this issue. Even though the land is under Quebec's authority, so to speak, at this point in time, and Canada really has no stake in the land, so to speak. But they're responsible because they inherited from the French, then the British, then the Canadian regime. They inherited it over the course of time, so they're responsible for it.
Okay.
So we bring it back home and we say, no, it's you're the one that has to be involved. There's a third party called Quebec. We have to deal with Quebec, and that's not a problem. We know that. That's not going to go away.
Okay. You're listening to K103.7, Tetewatha, Partyline Talkshow. I guess, were there any other kinds of things that
there's some very important
key issues,
Some key issues, and I'll try to go through them in a quick fashion, without hopefully doing them justice. One of them is there's been an outstanding issue for years, since 1990, called Norton versus the Queen.
Oh, okay.
We had taken a lawsuit against Canada, against the Queen, way back when, regarding what happened here in 1990. And it's just sat there, we didn't really do anything with it. And recently, last year, the government lawyers, Justice Department, asked our legal department, what's going to happen with this? Are you intending to push it, go after the government, sue them, or whatever it may be? So we said at that time, they were saying, "Do you want a settlement? Let's shoot for." So our legal department came back to us, sat with us, and I spoke up right away, and I said, "Okay," I said, let's talk about settlement." But it wasn't necessarily about money. First thing that came to mind was what happened to us in 1990. This is what it's all about, and that they have to find a way, and jointly we'll do it, to come to call it a peace agreement, because there's never been anything that happened since, after 1990, the barricades came down. Everybody went back to their respective corners, and we're still left with the aftermath. We're still left with the pain and the memory of what happened back then. It went through such a painful period, and for the last 28 years, that's it. And a lot of people have gone to their graves here in Kahnawake, heavy hearts, and not ever having anything settled in terms of, what happened to us. Why hasn't there been some kind of understanding between us? So I felt it was an important time for us to go to Canada and say, okay, we'll make a settlement, but here are the conditions. We are going to have some kind of major event here on the island where where major actions took place. And we want the Prime Minister of Canada. We want the Governor General of Canada and the head of the military in a ceremonial sort of fashion, an apology, but all underneath the umbrella of reconciliation, because that's the big word right now, reconciliation. Everybody's talking about that. So we put this on the table yesterday and said, this is something that needs to happen. And back, our attorneys were instructed to go back to Canada and start talking to them about that too. I don't think it's premature to be talking about that right now at this point, even though Canada has not necessarily accepted. We don't know how that's going to come out, but certainly we're pushing for that to happen. And I think the community would appreciate the fact that we need to have something like that,
Absolutely.
And as a sidebar, I went to Ireland back in August, and I was invited to this. It was a reconciliation event out there, and they wanted to know about what's going on here with Native people, Government of Canada, and Canadians in general. There's an organization out there which I've become familiar with. They invited me to participate, and ironically, the one person that was there, who I sat on a panel with, was General de Chastelain. Now, the name will remind a lot of people about 1990, because General de Chastelain was the general that was responsible for the troops that were here. So we sat on a panel, and ironically, he was receiving an award and commemorating that he brokered the peace in Ireland between the Catholics and the Protestants, and all the turmoil that was going on. They gave him an award for this took 20 years ago, and all the fighting ceased and all that kind of things that were happening. But it's still a problem, though. There's underlying resentment between the parties. But he was there. They commemorated him. They gave him an award, and all this kind of stuff. And he spoke about his role. Then he touched a little bit about 1990, because I was there, So he said Grand Chief Norton was involved. He says, I remember him, and just a few words. But then when it was my turn, I really laid things out, and I said, isn't it odd that this general that we stood across facing each other with his military surrounding Kahnawake, guns pointed at us, now comes here and is given an award for brokering peace. What about the peace back home in Kahnawake? That has never been settled. I said, for me, it's still outstanding. So something has to happen in order to take care of that. So it was a good opportunity, a good segue to bring that to the forefront. And yesterday, in our discussions with the Deputy Minister in Ottawa, I raised that at the table, and I talked about this particular situation in Ireland. I said, surprise, surprise. So I said, this is on the table, and the the Deputy Ministers acknowledged that and said, yes, we should do something of that nature. Now, how that's going to turn out, I don't know, Yeah. But we'll see. But I'm hoping for sometime early next year that we'll be able to do this.
Okay. You're listening to K103.7's Tetewatha Partyline Talkshow.
Come on.
And welcome back to Tetewatha Partyline Talkshow. I'm your host, Lou-Ann Stacey, and joining me in studio for MCK Friday is the Grand Chief, Joe Norton. So I guess we've had a chance to talk about some of the meetings, and I know we're just skimming through because I know there's tons more. But I had wanted, when you were coming on the show, we've had an opportunity over the past couple of months to talk about the issue of cannabis. And basically, we've had people come on to talk a little bit about the legal aspects and some of the business aspects. But I guess one of the questions I had is, from a leadership perspective, what are the thoughts and thinking with regards to exploring this as an industry? And what I'm going to ask is, how do we go as a community from zero tolerance to a law development to negotiations with a company? And what's the rationale behind it? I guess because I'm reading a lot on social media, and a lot of people are questioning different things. So I just wanted to hear from a political body, like where does that, why are we pursuing something like that?
Well, I'm glad you put it that way because I've been around a long time, and I was there in 1988, I believe, when zero tolerance was first introduced into the community for drugs. You know, period. We passed a resolution. And I was shown a copy of that resolution just the other day. You know,
Really?
It's ancient in a sense.
I know.
30 years, you know. And then since then, that's been the let's call it the norm, and we've struggled with the with the issue of drugs, you know, the zero tolerance and all of that, and that's been what our peacekeeper department has been following as much as possible, you know, with their investigations and all that. Anyway, so fast forward to a year and a half, 2 years ago, when this discussion began in Parliament, you know, when they start talking about the legalization of pot. I think it's been about 2 years.
About
now.
that, yeah.
Yeah, not much longer than that. And it hit our table in one way or another. First, it was in private discussions among some of the chiefs, you know, and said, well, what are we going to do? We have a zero tolerance. We have this. We have that. You know, and what are we going to do if it becomes legitimate? Because it sounds like it's going to become legitimate. It's pot will no longer be considered illegal. What happens in Kahnawake? So gradually we began to talk about it. Then there was a push in Parliament to make it legal. You know, and bills were put forth and things of that nature. The usual parliamentary procedure took place. And when we got to the point that I'm looking at it personally, I say, that's going to become legal. It's going to be legitimate, you know. So we had to take on more of a view of what happens when it becomes legitimate, and pot is no longer considered illegal. And then, you know, the details began to come out on what it was going to be like, what the rules and regulations are, you know, and the province's involvement. And it began to grow and grow. It began to become more of a concern, till I got to the point where we said, well, we better do some consulting in the community. And before we go to the public with anything, let's start talking with all the structures that have a responsibility in that process. And that was the peacekeepers. That was, you know, like calling on the hospital and community services and any organization, public safety, any organization that we felt would feel the effects. And also thinking about, well, let's not forget there's a public policy now on the whole idea, or not the idea, but the issue of zero tolerance. What happens with that? If we're going to have to, and it became obvious that we would have to put something in place in the community. If for no other reason than so that there's not going to be a conflicting situation between if pot was legalized around us and people were going to participate in it, what are we going to do internally if we keep the zero tolerance in place? There'll be a problem, you know, right off the bat for our peacekeepers, and what are they enforcing? You know, so we said let's put something together that they can enforce. Before we looked at the commercial side or anything of that nature, you know, what's acceptable, and the dialogue began. And during the course of the dialogue, some of the council members, one of them being myself in particular, I was approached by people from New Brunswick, and they were asking, you know, for Kahnawake to get involved in a process, in a project that they had, in which they were going to, and they've done it now, they're in the business, with a dispensary. And they've been doing that for almost a year now, if not longer, and they were raided and they were shut down. They opened back up again. And it was ironic because the RCMP gave them back all of their, whatever they had seized, including money, and they apologized to them, and they've left them alone, and they've operated, you know, since then. Anyway, so we had various people come and talk to us, individual council members, to give clarity to what was out there. And of course, there was a whole procedure Canada was talking about, going to Health Canada, getting a license, you know, and our people were looking into that. Our legal department was looking into that, and gradually we began to build like a picture of what was out there. In the meantime, the dialogue at the table as well as in the community was, what about the commercial side? And I sat and I talked to a number of people. Said, well, I got a big, huge field. I wouldn't mind planting on that and selling it to the council as a commercial venture. But there's a certain sector of the community that said no, zero tolerance. There's another sector that said, well, we would be in favor, and there were surveys that were done, and Gina and Rhonda could, Chief Gina and Chief Rhonda could speak better to that, and they have in the past.
Yes, they have.
They have, and they're part of a survey process, either phone calls or kiosks at our business center. Rhonda handling the legislative side of it, and Gina looking at it from the economic side, commercial side. So we tried to cover as many bases as possible, and there was support for the medicinal side.
Yeah.
And there was people who were saying that if it's medicinal, regardless of whether we have a zero tolerance procedure, people begin to understand, what the impact could be if we just stood pat and said, nope, that's it, that's all. And and all around, peacekeepers and so on and so forth said we do need a law, we do need something in place. Well, let's see what that's going to look like.
Yeah.
But then the commercial side started to kick in. People were against the recreational side, and they said, well, if we're going to sell that, as long as it goes out of the community, we're not selling it here internally, then we don't have a problem with that, So there was a variety of approaches. Then, of course, there was pressure from internally, individuals.
Yeah. Because I was going to ask that question, because I know there's local businesses, I know people who have engaged in it, and how does that play a part in it,
It has a role. We've made it abundantly clear that it's open to individuals to participate in this. But first, let's get the law in place.
Yeah.
Let's get that passed. Then let's look at the commercial side. That can happen, very quickly. Let's look at the commercial side and begin to develop, if that's where we're going to go, if it's going to become there's commercial opportunity, then we have to talk about it internally over here. And of course, people looked at this, and I forgot about a year ago, I think it was in September a year ago, we had passed a moratorium saying, nobody's going to be allowed to put in place, the shops and dispensaries, because we don't want to see the same thing happen. Two examples: one with the cigarettes in the past, where there was no rules, regulations, and everybody opened up all over the place. And then in this particular, if you want to call it industry, there's Tyndonega, and as of last count, there's 50 buildings, facilities that have been opened over there, and it's really concerning for them because there's no control over that now.
And I guess that's a question I have. The community's been waiting for a tobacco law for 2 years, and it hasn't been passed yet or brought in. So why does the cannabis law being passed and potentially enacted before, is that to deal with the outside, or is it to protect us internally? And I guess that's
it's a matter of both, really. It's to set the record straight off the bat, to make sure people understand that if we're going to have, this legitimized, then it's going to be controlled, and it's not going to be chaos, And there's examples of 3 occasions now where someone opened up, was selling, shut down, opened again, shut down, and opened again, and was shut down. The last community meeting we had, we made it abundantly clear that we're not going to allow for that. And, nobody argued anything against that. Those that want to be involved to a certain extent in a controlled, by the law by the book operation, and that's good. I mean, it it's not that it respects the council, it respects the community.
Yeah.
That's what it's about.
And I guess that's part of the questions, is because sometimes, you know, and I've read this, people are seeing it as a conflict of interest, you know, a governing body, and then talking about going to speak with a business, you know, and you know, I wanted to clarify that for the community and what your thoughts are on that, because it's important.
It is perceived as that, but I have to remind the community itself, we have not made any agreement. We haven't signed on the dotted line. We have an understanding between us that we will explore this together. And if it's not going to be, it's not going to be. There will be something else, though, that'll come along. And it may be, and I've said, could be a conglomerate of businesses from here involved in this. You know, there's no question about it. I'm very open-minded about it. Some of my colleagues may not think the same way, but then again, you know, we're free to think the way we want.
And I think part of it is how do you come to something that can benefit the community? Because to me, that's the bottom line, not necessarily individuals. And that's a big complaint, because every time we've been involved in one of these business industries, we don't seem to get any further ahead. We still have people who rely on fundraising. We still have people who rely on. So what do we do as a collective in order to do that? And is this a solution to that?
Well, let's understand this is part of the solution, because we have the gaming industry. We have a number of other initiatives that are out there in which we're drawing revenue from to be used within the community. All the revenue we get is being used in the community. And every year there's an audit, there's a report of what we do. This would be part of that. Now, there's estimates, you know, that this could draw anywhere from, you know, a couple of $4 or $5 million to $20 million, $25 million. You know, the numbers could be infinite in terms of that. Nobody knows for sure until we get into it. We know that it's going to do well.
Yeah.
There's no question about it, even though there's competition out there. And the revenue derived, some of it would have to go back to operations if we were in the business. Then there would be the other side of it is to part of that revenue going into help the various types of institutions here in the community, you know, whether it be education and things.
Because I think that was a big piece in this when Rhonda and Gina had come on the show, was because there is concern from health and social service agencies and education and awareness. So to me, that has to be an increase, and definitely each of those programs would have to be having more funds in order to do that.
There's no question that in my mind at this point, and that's not going to change either, in terms of where those funds will go, where they will be directed to help the community, to assist the community. I mean, we're already doing that now, like the splash pad, you know.
Yeah.
There was a substantial amount of money that went towards that. That money came from, you know, one of the online gaming companies that we have that put the money towards that, you know. So, and then there's an employment factor too. I forget what the figures are, but it's a substantial amount of people that would be employed in the industry, you know. If we were to have a partnership with this company, you know, there would be substantial numbers there. But not only that, any other arrangements we have with private individuals who would be a part of this, they would be creating their own revenue, and we're asking that they also contribute back to the community, you know, and they would be employing people too. So this thing could grow substantially in the next little while.
So I guess with the growing, and I'm going to come back to the zero tolerance, how does that fit that? Like the community gave direction and we're off into this aspect of it.
We would have to undo that.
Okay.
That would be a key element. And people have the right to be in opposition, and they'll be resisting, you know, people saying, no, that's got to stay. But the alternative to saying, all right, we'll leave it as is and we won't do this, then what happens,
Yeah, because I guess that's the part I'm getting to, like what your thoughts are on that, because it kind of is a contradiction. We're zero tolerance, but we're operating in some of the with gambling and gaming, and we're dealing. That's not zero tolerance. Zero tolerance is nothing. So we as a community, what are we ready to do? And that's not just to you, but it's all leadership.
If you wish, we can use the recent example of the EGDs, I guess they're called electronic gaming devices. There was community policy on that, saying that these slot machines, but will not be tolerated in the community and all that, because there was nothing in place to regulate them at the time when they came in, and they were in little grocery stores in the corners, and they were in some of the social clubs, and it became part of the revenue for their particular venues. So the public policy, we reversed that to allow for private sectors to be able to bring in those machines, put them in, to draw revenue from, but to give a percentage back to the community, And in those instances, it's public knowledge. They've committed $1 million a year each. So $2 million a year from 2 sites. Mm-hmm. So there was a give and take there, and the policy on no gaming devices that was gone. So I would say similarly, you look at it from that point of view. You've done it here. Here's an example. This may be a lot more controversial, which it is, and I understand that it's a hallucinatory. What do you call it? Hallucinatory drug, and so in looking at the two and comparing them, it may not be as one may be less addictive and less problematic than the other, but the principles are the same in terms of saying you would have to reverse what happened 30 years ago.
Okay. Well, thank you to the Grand Chief for joining us today on Tetewatha. Coming up on Monday, KOR Storytelling with Jose Donaleo. Up next with the 1 o'clock news is Kathleen Speckert. Have a great afternoon, everybody. Onagiwahi.
Yeah.